So Isodia has a lower opportunity cost in the production of clothing and therefore should specialize in the production of clothing. For the United States, has a lower opportunity cost in the production of food and therefore should specialize in that production. Now, if you notice, both United States and Isodia need food and clothing. So therefore, they produce and consume at point U4 for the United States and at point I3 for Isodia. But these are the rates of consumption in isolation, in other words, with no trade. That is also called in autarky. Well, the rates of exchange for each country are 2 units of food exchanged for 1 clothing in the United States and half unit of food exchanged for 1 clothing in Isodia. So this is where we notice the Isodia should specialize in the production of clothing because they give up less than the United States. Conversely, if we divide by 2 here, the exchange of the United States is 1 food, 1 half clothing. And if we multiply by 2 on both sides in this exchange rate, the same exchange rate in Isodia is 1 food, 2 clothing. So the United States has a competitive advantage in the production of food. Now, if they can exchange the 2 products at a rate that is between the 2 rates, they both will benefit. That rate might be 1 food, 1 clothing. If you notice, it's between the 2 rates. And more specifically, as your slide suggests, 200 units of food exchanging for 200 units of clothing. This is an arbitrary number. It could have been 100 to 100, 150 to 150, 180 to 180, as long as they are the same and follow the 1-to-1 ratio. Well, what happens if they specialize each one in its own product and then they exchange at this rate? Well, the Isodians specialize in clothing and then they produce 400 units of clothing and then they sell or send 200 units of clothing to the United States. So they go back in this line up to that point or down to that point. But the point is zero food and 200 clothing. But they are receiving 200 food units from the United States. So they move up here up to that point because that's 200 units of food and 200 here of clothing. They end up at point I, which is a much higher point of consumption than what they had available before trade. So that'll be the gain from trade for Isodia. In the case of the United States, they specialize in the production of food at 600. They send 200 units to Isodia, so they end up at 400. But they gain 200 units of clothing from Isodia, so they end up at point U, 400 food and 200 clothing, which is again a point higher than their consumption point in isolation.